Welcome to Creators and Keepers, the podcast of CultureVerse.org. CultureVerse is a 501c3 nonprofit organization which exists at the intersection of art and technology. We seek to use 3D technology and immersive digital experiences to bring unseen art and artifacts to the light of day. We serve the creators and keepers of art, culture, and knowledge. Today, we will be speaking with Jason Ferguson. Jason is an installation and performance artist originally from the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. As an artist, Jason considers himself to be an absurdist. His mind is continually reflecting on the physical and experiential nature of human existence. He explores this and attempts to understand this through his art. In his sculptures, you'll find uncanny and slightly unnerving presentations of familiar objects. He uses humor to reflect on subjects that may, at times, seem heavy. Jason has exhibited domestically in locations such as Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit and internationally in Tokyo and Berlin, to name just a couple locations. Jason is also a professor in the School of Art and Design at Eastern Michigan University, where he teaches foundations in 3D design, advanced studio courses, and digital fabrication and exploration in the making. Welcome to Creators and Keepers, Jason.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of a fun conversation for me to have because, I met you not as an artist. I met you as a father of one of my daughter's friends. So we have kids who are the same age. And then when I came to this role, as director of CultureVerse, a mutual friend of ours, Trevor Stone, suggested that we get in touch. And I was like, oh yeah, I already know Jason. So it's been fun for me to get to know you in a different way and to get to see some of your processes up close and meet some of your students and tour your classrooms at Eastern. So that's been just really fun. And the other thing that's a little bit different about what we're doing today is you're the first person that we are interviewing that we haven't already done a project with.
Right.
We're sort of, we're existing in a similar sphere, which is that intersection of art and technology and how these things are blended. So tell me a little bit first about your role as a professor.
Okay.
And what you equip your students with and why that exploration in tech is important.
Sure. So I began, in academia almost immediately out of grad school. I was hired at Penn State to teach some foundations sculpture classes as well as some upper level sculpture classes. And I taught at Penn State for a year, and then I got an offer from the University of Idaho to build a sculpture program from scratch. So we knew nothing about Idaho, and we thought there'd be an exciting opportunity to just start something fresh, several thousand miles away from our home in Maryland. So all of that kind of experience, I think, led to what I do at Eastern. And my hire at Eastern was to start to bridge foundations level 3D design techniques with advanced level and graduate level sculpture making. About 2 years into teaching at Eastern, we got our first 3D printer, and nobody really knew exactly what to do with it or how to use it or anything like that. So I said, I would like to play with it. So I put it in my office and I played with it, and I quickly found the flaws in it because 2012 was kind of the beginning of this sort of explosion of 3D printing being accessible for people that don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was like a maker. It was the beginning of this sort of maker movement where technology was being replicated through sharing information. So this RepRap project where Adrian Boyer decided to make a self-replicating 3D printer, and he shared the schematics online and the plans to make your own. And that idea just evolved. So it was like a community where people could contribute to this idea, refine things, and then make their own and share those plans. So I found the flaws in the first iteration in 2012, and I added to that community and redesigned and rebuilt my own 3D printer. And then just kind of went from there. My colleague, Brooke Stevens, who teaches fibers, she she wanted to create a new space and a new program in the Pat Williams Digital Lab, which is tied to fibers, but she wanted to open it up for the rest of the students as well in the arts. So we wrote the first iteration of digital fabrication in the class, and it has grown since then. We had like one 3D printer, we had a laser cutter, and we had a free arm sewing machine, and some of the equipment wasn't digital, but it was all tied into this sort of experimental class. And then since then, for the last 5 years or so, I've taught it solo, and we've really exploded. We've got, I think, 8 3D printers now. We've got 2 handheld 3D scanners, a desktop 3D scanner, laser cutter. We've also started to involve CNC machines. We have 2 machines that I built with my colleagues that are just, they're called Shapeoko. They're like kit-based CNC machines just to kind of show students what's possible. And then we just acquired a ShopBot Desktop Max. So we're constantly expanding and trying to keep up with how technology evolves.
Yeah, when I visited your studio at Eastern, it was apparent that the technology was there to stay, right? It felt things were alive, the energy was really cool, everybody was like working to finish up their semester and their projects, and the 3D printers were all going, there was, it was evidence that it was a fully formed thing, right? It wasn't the way you describe, we just had this thing in my office that I played with, and now you have a program.
It was 10 years of, it's constant experimentation, and that's what the class is about. It's about looking at technology with a critical eye. Like, it's really cool and exciting, but what I encourage students to do is reflect on how what they're doing with technology has meaning, and perhaps it might steer the way that work is perceived in the wrong direction. It might become just kind of a gimmick, right?
Right.
So I want students to take their traditional background, have an exploration and sort of an exposure to new contemporary methods, and then find where those methods using 3D scanners and 3D printers, things like that, where that helps the work evolve and not, I don't think it's a replacement for the hand by any means, right?
Right.
So we talk about that constantly.
And that's an important thing, I think with technology, is it enhancing something that is already happening? Is it taking us in a new direction? Is it necessary at all times? Do we have to use it, right? And the way that you take your students through that exploration, I think, is really informative and important. It's not saying these are the tools you must use. It's these are the tools you could use, and here they are, and how to use them should you want to. So getting that 3D printer in your office, was that sort of a transformative moment for your own art making process? And sort of what was Jason doing as an artist prior to that, and where has that exploration taken you?
Sure. I laugh because it was kind of unfortunate. The answer is yes, it did transform my art practice. It's unfortunate because I am pretty obsessive when I get interested in something. So when I was exposed to welding and metalwork as an undergraduate student, I stopped everything else and I only did metalwork for 3 years until I fully felt like I could do anything I wanted in metal, right? So this tinkering with this little 3D printer, it's been 10 or 12 years now I understand the technology now. I've built several 3D printers from raw materials, and as I mentioned before, I've sort of added to this RepRap community and tried to help share the knowledge or ways that things can be done, but the community is huge. There's constant kind of upgrades. Before that, my work was, I don't think my work has changed. I think conceptually, you could look at my entire career over 20 years, and I think that thematically and conceptually the work is all one thing. I look at my entire body of work as one piece, right? This sort of reflection on how we move through the world and trying to better understand the physicality of our existence, the way that we kind of perceive and take in information and how we process it as living beings with limited time here, right? So a few pieces before the technology started to become integral in my work. So one piece, so I did a piece called Google Searching for God, right? And I was thinking about how with the introduction, so this is technology, but it's not using technology in the way we're talking about, right? I was thinking about cyberspace and how, throughout all of existence, all of mankind, we've been seeking through different means some sort of explanation of a higher being or some sort of proof of a higher being, something that's bigger than us that explains what we're doing here, right? And this is where the absurdist or like the kind of humor comes into the work. I was like, well, now we have cyberspace, which is like this infinite space that's brand new in the last 20 years or something like that at the time. So maybe this new space has some sort of evidence or proof that we haven't tapped into yet because we haven't found it. So just using like Google as a start, I just put God into the search engine just to see what would come up. And the first thing was Wikipedia's definition of God. So I started thinking like, okay, well, Wikipedia is this, it's like a somewhat universal. It's a ridiculous thing. It's something I tell students to avoid using for any sort of information. But it's a community where you can contribute to a definition, you can contribute information, and then some scholar somewhere says, vets it and says it's okay to be archived into this Wikipedia thing. So I was like, well, if Wikipedia's definition of God must be somewhat, universal because anybody could contribute to it. So this would be the definition at the time. I know that's not true, but that's the way I wanted to spin it. So what I did was I transcribed Wikipedia's definition of God, but the hypertext behind the site. So if you open up the hypertext behind the site, it's just codes, coding, words here and there, but it's just coding. And you can scroll to the right like forever, like one line will go out into infinite space, or you can scroll down forever. So I took sort of like a monk-like approach and sat with the typewriter without ink, and I just typed every line of code from Wikipedia's definition of God. So it ends up being like a 40-foot scroll. And the scroll has no ink, so you have to get very close to just see the embossing of the text. Mm-hmm. And then anytime the word God appears in the coding, I illuminated it from below. So I made a custom table that has these little spots where light comes through the word God. So it's almost like a DNA test. Like it looks like this, these sort of dots throughout this entire 40-foot scroll. So that's what I was doing. That I was doing all kinds of
and also
absurd,
beautiful.
very labor-intensive, with purpose but without meaning, right? Like it's exploiting the idea that this is probably not going to turn up any information, but hopefully it makes people think about things differently. Like, okay, well, maybe it makes me reflect on what God or higher being means to me differently, right? Mm-hmm. So. That was a very long explanation of one piece, but that I was doing performative, very bodily focused works, kind of exhaustive works. So that kind of transitioned into the technology, and I started to put all of my efforts and all of my energy into understanding the technology in a critical way to see how I could use it when it made sense in my own practice.
And speaking of that self-exploration, you have a piece that is your skeleton.
I do. I have a couple of pieces that are related.
Yeah.
So, and that's where I think technology, the recent technology that we're talking about, has enhanced my practice, right? I'm very interested in precision, and I'm interested in the idea of embodiment. So like an object that would have embody an idea versus metaphorically just referencing an idea, right? Mm-hmm. I don't just say like, oh, like maybe Wikipedia has a definition of God. I painstakingly type out every line to see if it's there, right? So it's embodiment for me. So the two pieces that we're talking about, I have actually two iterations of the skeleton. So I worked with the University of Michigan, and they have a dedicated MRI machine for research. So I was able to work with them. And I got some grant money from Eastern to support the research. I used about 8 hours of MRI scans of my body. I worked with EOS scanning, which is this It's primarily used for children and with spinal deformities. So it's a very fast, low radiation, full body scan. So it renders their spine and their pelvis and lower limbs within 6 seconds with low radiation exposure. So I was able to get access to one of those at Northwestern in Chicago, and I got my spine and my pelvis rendered. And then I also contacted my dentist I had a really bad extraction and root canal. So I said, hey, can I have the dental records? Can I have those images of my CT and CBCT scans of my head? And she let me literally get onto the computer. She's like, you can I don't know how to just go ahead. So I put in a flash drive. I felt like a spy. Put a flash drive in and downloaded all of my thousands of images of my skull and my teeth. And then using all of those thousands of images, I was able to go through with medical software and segment out layer by layer what is bone. And then I 3D printed, like I said before, 2 full-scale copies of my skeleton that have been displayed in different ways. And then the kind of counterpart to that is a piece called Being Nothing More. And that piece is, I wanted to calculate my volume. So skeleton is like a architecture or substructure of our anatomy. Mm-hmm. What I'm more interested in, I think, is the idea that we occupy a certain amount of space.
Yeah.
So right now I occupy a certain amount of physical space in this chair, and nobody can share that space. You could try, but you're only going to be able to be adjacent to that space. This is my space right now. And the amount of space I occupy will change in 10 days or in a year. That number fluctuates. So what I did was I ended up finding out that I did it through water displacement first, right? I got into a bathtub and measured the water displacement to find out how much volume I occupy. But then I also found out about a process using a bod pod. It's called air displacement plethysmography. So it's like an air pressure. It looks like a Mork and Mindy egg spaceship. Mm-hmm. So you get in this thing, and they use it for nutritionists and to track basically athletes at Eastern and other institutions. They track their body changes, their body mass index, and muscle development, things like that. So I was able to get into one of those and find out exactly how much volume I occupied at that time, which was 5,616.188 cubic. It was a very specific number, cubic inches, right? So I was able to take that number and CNC mill that same number into a volume that was more of an abstract boulder form, which has meaning in itself. But the idea that this object occupies the same place, the same amount of space as myself, that was what my interest was. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't have achieved that without technology, right? I could have done something that was more sort of referential, but that was so specific. That's what I'm interested in, is the absurdity of how specific it can be, right?
Right, and carrying it so many decimal points.
Yeah,
it is quite absurd, and why do we even need to know that? But it is, right. You're thinking about it and exploring it.
And some people don't know that. I don't necessarily explain that unless I'm giving a talk about my work. So, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how would you, recommend for somebody who's not necessarily using this type of technology in their artwork, whether it be 3D scanning, photogrammetry that you can do with your cell phone, 3D printing, when does it make sense to use the technology, or how would you encourage somebody to start that exploration if they're curious?
Sure. Those are 2 very different questions.
They are very different. Pick one.
To make sense, that answer cannot be answered. That's not something there's not a universal answer for that. I think that each idea, I still don't use technology when it doesn't make sense, mm-hmm. right? I start with the idea, and then I follow whatever means make the most sense to communicate the idea to the viewer in a way that is effective and not didactic, where I'm kind of hitting them over the head with the idea. So I think that has to be asked with every single piece or every single idea by the artist. As far as the second part of the question, right? Getting into, the internet is full of you don't have to go to school for this information. It's everywhere online and YouTube and other spaces. But I encourage you to go to, like Eastern, we have a great program that is about using traditional techniques and then also exploring new technology and how they interact. So the art program at Eastern is fantastic, and that's why I've been there for over 12 years now. I've jumped around a little bit, so I planted myself here for a reason.
Yeah, when I toured your space at Eastern, it really made me want to go back to school. Yeah, I was feeling it pretty strong. Well, Jason, thank you for spending time with us today, and it's lovely to have you as a neighbor and partner and friend and somebody who knows about the tech we're using and somebody that we can rely on for some brain power, because you've really, really dived deep into all of this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. CultureVerse is sponsored by Art Train, Fractured Atlas, and is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. You can learn more about our organization, our projects, and how to get involved by visiting CultureVerse.org. Our production staff consists of Matt Grossman, Shanley Carlton, Dave Sharp. I'm Aubrey Martinson. Our music is Anahita and is by Dave Sharp and Rowan Bose.